Thank you very much for that. Now, we've been asking viewers to put their questions to Labour on the day Ed Miliband has launched the party's manifesto. People have been tweeting and sending in their questions using the hashtag BBC Ask This. And our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, has been looking at your tweets and videos, and she joins us now. Vicky, hi.
Hi there, and yes, a big day for Labour, a chance to talk directly to voters about what they're offering in their manifesto. And to answer your questions today, I'm joined by the Shadow Business Secretary, Chuka Umunna. And first of all, I mean, the tenor of today was to talk about your weaknesses in a way, wasn't it? Talking about something which voters don't trust you on the economy. Is that a bit of a risk, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't quite describe it like that. I mean, look, this is how democracy is supposed to work. We put forward our offer to the people in a manifesto and they take a view on it. But look, what we're seeking to do is to create a fairer, more equal Britain where your viewers' hard work is actually rewarded. But we understand that, you know, people are used to commitments and pledges being thrown around. They want to know that we're going to do this responsibly and actually deliver what we promise. So at the same time that we're saying, look, we're going to give you a fairer, more equal Britain where your work is rewarded, we're also being really clear about how, in the context of the need to balance the books, we all know coming out of the global financial crisis, the public finances, had been under some pressure. We're outlining all of these pledges, but being very specific about how we're going to pay for them. I think that's really important to give people confidence that you'll deliver what you actually say you're going to do. And you can compare and contrast that to the Conservative Party, which in the last few days alone has made unfunded spending commitments up to almost £20 billion, and they haven't said how they're going to pay for it. We have. So, for example, the NHS, which we know, and Vicky, I think you and I maybe have spoken about the NHS before, a huge concern for voters. People see the crisis in their A&E. Now, we're going to raise £2.5 billion to put into the NHS through a high-value property tax and a tobacco levy.
Though? You don't want to overpromise, so you're not promising the £8 billion?
Well, they haven't. I mean, in a way, it would be very contradictory for us to, on the one hand, criticise an unfunded commitment and then say we're going to splash around money in the way that they're suggesting they will, when they haven't told how they're going to. They haven't told the British public how they're going to pay for it. So that's why. I mean, I think just that very fact that, you know, the easy thing would be to say, well, we're just going to do exactly what George Osborne has said, but he hasn't said how he's going to pay for that, and so. We don't want to sell you a pup, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Questions that people have asked you specifically today. So the first one there from Bhavin Shah. Does less borrowing mean more tax? How will you balance the books? And there is still some uncertainty about how you're going to balance the books, because you won't tell us the date by which you're going to balance the current deficit.
Well, look, the first thing is can I spell out what our budget is going to be in 2019, 2020, or all of the financial years between now and then? I can't, because economic circumstances change. We don't know what the rate of growth is going to be, so I can't give you a precise figure. I mean, in the same way that maybe if you're thinking about your family finances in the future, you probably don't know whether you're going to be able to afford to go on holiday in 2019 or where you're going to go, because you don't know what your situation is going to be. Now, on the first of these questions, does less borrowing mean more tax? Of course, there's three ways that you reduce the debts of the country. One is, of course, you will have to ask, but we're only going to ask higher earners to make a bigger contribution through our bank bonus tax, for example, to pay for a job guarantee for people. But it's not also who you ask to make a little bit of a bigger contribution. Of course, there will be cuts. We've been very clear about that. But in addition to that, the biggest reason that the government wasn't able to meet its debt and deficit targets, the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility said in December, was because your viewers' wages have been stagnating. And if, you know, people haven't had a pay rise for ages, and if you're not earning more money, then we're not seeing bigger contributions into the exchequer in terms of the income tax you're paying and the national insurance that you're paying. So it's those three things: higher pay, some cuts,
are going to specific promises, aren't they? They're not going to deficit reduction.
But that's a good thing that we're actually specifying where we're going to get the money.
How are you going to balance the books?
Pay for different things. Well, we're going to get the current budget, day-to-day spending as it's called, into surplus by the end of the next Parliament, and we want to actually see overall debt on a downward trajectory. But as I said, we need people to be earning more money, hence why we're going to get the minimum wage up beyond £8 and provide tax incentives to get employers to pay a living wage. We're going to ask the top 1% to make a bit of a bigger contribution, and of course there's going to be cuts that we'll have to make. So I'll give you an example. Some people said, oh, well, you haven't spelt out any cuts. Well, my Shadow Cabinet colleague Hilary Benn, the Shadow Community Secretary, has outlined £500 million worth of efficiency savings that he can make in that budget year on year. When you tot up a number of the things that we've said, it does actually add up to quite a lot of money. Now, is it the whole? Are we able to outline all of it at this stage in 2015 for 2019? No, and I'm sorry about that, but that's just the way it is.
And growth, this question now. How will Labour policy stimulate and or protect significant and sustained growth? Because it sounds to me like you are relying on growth to pay off the deficit.
Well, it's really important, and you know, we've got an outrageous situation, frankly, Vicky, right now, where British workers work amongst the longest hours in Western Europe, but they're not being given the tools to do the job properly. And so in spite of the fact people are doing more hours, it takes on average a British worker to Friday to do what an average worker in the G7 has completed by Thursday. We have the second lowest rate of productivity in the G7. Now we need to get that up. So how do you change that? How do you give people the tools? First of all, we've got to make sure people have got the right skills, and we did very well in getting more people into higher education, but we need more people to be doing technical and vocational qualifications and skills that employers tell us is very lacking, and that's why we're going to boost the number of apprenticeships by, for example, any large company that takes on a big government contract requiring them to provide apprenticeships, but also ensuring that we protect the apprenticeship brand, and they've got to be really good quality too. The other part of the coin is, of course, ensuring that businesses invest more in plant, machine, R&D, science, those new ideas that enable a business to operate more efficiently. And that way we can get our productivity up and we get growth up.
OK, so on a similar theme, talking about workers there. 1995, Tony Blair promised an end to zero-hours contracts. Why should we believe you this time?
Well, at the time that, I don't quite remember this, at the time I think I was probably still at school, but zero-hours contracts were not the phenomena that they are now. They were a very niche thing in the overall labour market, whereas now we've got 1.8 million zero-hours contracts in use. We've seen amongst where people have got the zero-hours contract as being their main employment, we've seen like a 20% increase in the last year on that. And what was in 95 a very niche thing, not really very prevalent in sectors, is now becoming the norm in a certain number of sectors. Now, are all zero-hours contracts, every single one, awful? No, but the problem is that too many of them are exploitative. They allow an employer to exploit somebody who is working for them under that arrangement. So you could turn up, for example, if you want a zero-hours contract here at the BBC, you could have turned up for your shift at 4:30 today, only to have your shift, this show, potentially cancelled, and have got no compensation at all. Now clearly you're here, you're doing the show, but just imagine you'd spent money. So
would you
travelling here.
You would keep some, would you?
It's exploitation we want to stop, and there are certain employers who don't think it is the right thing to put people on these kind of contracts. As there's a good example, Brompton Bicycles, you know, the guys who make the fold-up bicycles are a good example. Who won't put people on them, but there are others like Sports Direct who have almost everybody on these zero-hours contracts, and we think, you know what, that's not good for our economy, that's not really fair to people, and that's what we're going to act to do. And frankly, the government sat on its hands in the face of this growing insecurity that we see in our labour market.
OK, let's move on now to some video questions that we've had from people. This one is from Jim Hammett.
How does the electorate know what policies will be implemented if a coalition is the outcome?
So talking there about coalitions, so the question is, because there is very likely to be a hung parliament, all these manifestos, not just yours, do they become a bit worthless? Because they'll all be traded away in a deal, won't they?
Well, the way our democracy works is that ultimately it's the electorate who decide what happens, and our job is to put forward our contract with the people, which is what we've done in our better plan for the country's future, our manifesto today. We're going for a majority Labour government, but what happens after that is down to you. It's down to the viewers at the end of the day, and then we have to deal with what comes after. But of course, ultimately, our job is to implement as much of our manifesto as possible, and I'm hoping and confident we'll be able to do all of that, because what we're going for is a majority Labour government with Ed Miliband as our Prime Minister. OK, and this next one from Julia Pearson.
Millions of young people like me are leaving school with gaps in their basic education. Why aren't topics such as human rights, voting, first aid and safety in same-sex relationships covered within our education system?
So an interesting one there from a younger viewer there about education, and actually how she obviously feels that it doesn't cover enough issues, maybe that it's too traditional, maybe.
Well, I couldn't quite hear exactly what...
Should we talk about gaps in basic education,
Yes.
so human rights, voting,
right,
first
okay.
aid, those
Well,
kind of things aren't taught to people?
We know, speaking to employers, that actually, I mean, never mind human rights, etc., basic literacy and numeracy is sometimes lacking when people come out of the education system and go and work for someone. And that's why we're going to provide that every single 18-year-old, well, every single young person will learn maths and English all the way through to 18. So at least when they come out of the system, they've got the basics. But in terms of a lot of the other things in the curriculum, like that tell you, I suppose, a bit more than the academic subjects, but go beyond that to tell you about commerce, industry, media, for example, a lot of this gets shoved into personal, social and health education. And one of the victims of this has been careers advice, for example, and people learning about the world of commerce, etc., which is why we're going to put in place one-to-one careers guidance for young people from the age of 11, so that they get proper advice and support in terms of knowing what the opportunities are out there and can make an informed choice about what they choose to do in the future. I should also say, of course, a really important thing for young people, we want, if we're elected, we're going to reduce the voting age to 16 so that more young people can actually participate in our democratic process.
OK, and finally, this question from Joseph Warfield.
How do the opposition leaders truly feel about our military, and do they think the current cuts made to them are completely necessary and justified?
So one on defence there, about whether you feel that the current cuts are completely necessary and justified, and what you would do with the defence budget.
Well, we can't, I mean, I think NATO has asked for us to spend 2.5% of GDP on the defence budget. Now, we're not in a position to be able to commit to that right now. Ed Balls, the Shadow Chancellor, has said that. But, I mean, if you take a step back, obviously, we are not going for the extreme fiscal package that George Osborne is aiming for, which will entail cuts in unprotected departments like defence, twice as deep as any round of cuts we've seen in any year of this government.
Why are you trying to have it both ways? You're saying that you're being fiscally very sensible, and yet you're saying, actually, we've got all this leeway that we can spend.
Yeah, what I was going to say, the second point is, but in spite of that, Vernon Coker, the Shadow Defence Secretary, has outlined, just for starters, £60 million worth of cuts that could be made to the defence budget. And I'll just say one really important thing on this, and this is part of the reason why I hold the view I do on Trident. We have, you know, a lot of uncertainty in the world, particularly in terms of the security position. We've got growing jihadism in Africa. We've seen the actions of IS in the Middle East. And also Russia is quite disturbing. And I think in that context, to do away with our nuclear deterrent Trident would be a grave mistake. And that's one of the reasons why we're absolutely clear that we will carry on with our nuclear deterrent with Trident, because I think, you know, going unilateral right now would be the wrong thing to do. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that, you know, in terms of the homegrown jihadism and radicalisation of people in our own country, that's going to solve the problem. But I suppose what I'm saying is, with growing insecurity around the world, that would be a grave mistake.
OK, Chuka Umunna, thank you very much indeed. So that is the view from Labour today, and we'll be putting other politicians from the other parties through their paces later in the week. So please send us in all of your questions.
Vicky Young, thank you very much.